Hi, I'm Alexa. I'm here in Rio at the moment, and I just wanted to take time to share a little bit about some of the questions that I'm bringing to Patmos into the Meraki experience. I have my little notebook here. What am I exploring? So, one of the projects I'm working on is a performance project called The Amish Futurist, and I basically put on an Amish costume and I walk around public and talk to people about their technology fears and angst. And so I'm very interested in this idea of how technology is changing our experiences of the self, and also different ways in which we can provoke startup founders to develop technology that's more human centric. So rather than having all these addictive platforms, to develop things that actually enable our best kind of humanity to shine through. Associated with that, there are a few different startups that I think are really doing this. One is a literary startup in Berlin called Pigeonhole that we're going to release a series of sermons through. So what Pigeonhole is doing is basically disrupting the publishing industry and bringing back this Dickens-like serialized format to literary markets. So you'll have a novel that gets released in different chapters, and each week you'll have a different chapter. And this is important for me not only because I think it's an exciting sort of way to encourage a slow, sort of nostalgic kind of reading, but it also means that you're giving access to different kinds of people to be able to publish their work. So I interviewed someone called King Tone, who used to run the Latin Kings gang in New York, and he was trying to get his manuscripts published. He has this incredible story of trying to turn the Latin Kings into a social movement. And I helped him send his proposal to various agents and publishers, and no one was really interested. And we're going to now release his manuscript through the Pigeon, and that will just be a whole new sort of access for his community to be able to read the story and understand the sort of management decisions that went into running a gang, and really trying to sort of re-engineer that gang with much more of a social conscience. So that's another thing that I'm quite excited about, is just these different marketplaces for self-expression. And one of the projects that's very closely related to what Meraki is exploring is something called Wisdom Hackers, which is really just a project that's taken over looking at how we build out infrastructure for more wisdom in our everyday experiences. And so we always, we're a seeker species. We have these questions that we want to explore, and yet we're never really give ourselves permission to go deep on issues unless there's like a client need or you're in a sort of formal educational program. And yet, so much of wisdom is really through this kind of deep immersive inquiry, and so often we use travel as a way of exploring that. But what I'm really hoping to do with Wisdom Hackers is build this small community and figure out what different seeker technologies we can take from historic practices of wisdom acquisition and mash these up so that people can basically go and probe into these big questions and then deliver these sermons at the end that are these reflections on what they've learned. And I'd love to take this methodology, this is an early prototype, but I'd love to take this methodology into schools in the US. So rather than having these formal class structures, being able for folks to go on these sort of learning journeys around these topics of wisdom that people set these own goals and their own questions around. Another project that I'm working on is called Fordlandia, which is based on this book, and I'm working with a friend of mine who's a playwright and a friend of hers who's a musician, and basically we're telling the story of Henry Ford's failed utopia in the Amazon. And this took place between Manaus and Belém. And here in Rio now, I'm looking for people that are involved in theater and are interested in performance, and basically doing lecture in a very different kind of way. So there's certainly like an academic story to be told here, but what we're hoping to do is do something much more transmedia, where we bring folks into an immersive experience around this concept of utopia and dystopia, and really show how Fordlandia, that project itself, but Ford's ghost is such a personality of capitalism that still haunts us very much today. So that's something I'm interested in investigating. And Fordlandia will really just be a pop-up experience to begin to explore that a little bit more. What I'd like to spend time with people prototyping in Meraki is really just this idea of pop-up experiences more generally, and how we can allow people to go into worlds that are created around very different kinds of norms. So I was talking to some friends of mine in Berlin about potentially having these places where people can come and experience a different kind of future or an alternative kind of history. So you can take the most radical ideas in alternative finance at the moment and pop them up into a future reality, and allow people to say, oh, this is what this will be like in 20 years or 30 years from now. This is one possible evolutionary future. Similarly, you could do something around the future of relationships or the future of intimacy. I was talking to my friend Eddie the other day, and he's been tasked with this question of what is the future of tourism? What will tourism look like in 100 years from now? So I'm just very excited to connect with people in Patmos, to really explore some of these ideas, to hang out on the beach, to get some sun, and then really just begin to think more about what the future of learning looks like. I've been asked to do a lot of talks since writing this book, The Misfit Economy, and it's super frustrating to have this one person on stage kind of sharing their stuff and everyone else sitting super passively in seats. And this idea that we can really liberate spectators and just get rid of this whole dichotomy between speakers and audiences is one that I want to do much more through performance, but it's also an alternative kind of learning to create much more experiential embodied types of learning. So that's some of what I'm working on, the energy that I would be bringing to Patmos, and I'm really psyched for this trip, and I hope to meet a lot of you there on the beach. Thank you.